Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for spending your lunch with us. So I know most of your cameras are off. You can have your lunch while we're sharing you some of the research that we've been doing here at Incube. But later we would really want to have a good discussion with you. If you have input, suggestions, comments, or if you have personal experience about the phenomena that we'll be discussing today, or if it's something related to your research, I hope you can also join us in a discussion, and you can turn your camera on and turn your microphone on and let us know what you think. So my name is Edson. I am the director of a new research center here at the WKWSCI School of Communication and Information, Incube, the Center for Information Integrity and the Internet. And we're very glad that you can join us this afternoon. We're sharing two research projects that we're working on, related research. One is a final year project actually from our undergraduate students focusing on cancel culture in Singapore. And closely related to that is another project work that my Eureka student is working on, focusing on online vigilantes in Singapore during COVID-19. So think about the photos that we're seeing online showing people not following COVID-19 regulations. One very recent example you might have heard is this lady who apparently has been populating her YouTube account with videos of Malay and Indian people, right? Her YouTube channel just got removed. Looks like she's also been disowned by her company. She lost her job. But I think it's an interesting case because to some extent she was canceled, but also what she's been doing with the videos she's been uploading is also a form of canceling. So I think these are interesting times we are in with all the technology that we have access to. And so I'm very excited that we get to share with you the research that our team at Incube, our teams, especially our student teams at Incube, are working on. So without further ado, we'll start with the first presentation this afternoon. This will be given by my students who just successfully completed their final year project, and they'll share about cancel culture. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll switch to Rachel, Beverly, Charlene, and Gabriel. They will share their screen now, and they will share about the very interesting research that they've just done. Rachel?
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So thanks to Prof Edson for introducing us. So like we mentioned, so I'm Rachel, and then my group is Beverly, Charlene, and Gabrielle. And today we'll be presenting on cancel culture and its underlying motivations. So first, to just give a brief overview of what we'll be covering for today. So we'll start off with a brief introduction of cancel culture. And to provide a local context, we'll be going through the case of social media influencer Xiaxue. Then we'll be going into for this study, our group actually decided to go with a sequential mixed methods approach. So we first started with our qualitative study, which aimed to define cancel culture. This then informed our quantitative study, where we aim to explore and try to understand the motivations behind canceling. And then we'll close off the presentation with our key implications and takeaways. Okay, so who is Xiaxue and why is she relevant to our study? So Xiaxue is a social media influencer who is known to post controversial views online. So actually in June of last year, some of her old tweets from 2010 were dug up, where she implied that migrant workers were molesting young girls and maids. So these tweets were actually dug up last year, and she received a lot of negative backlash. People trended the hashtag punish Xiaxue online, and she actually lost a lot of brand partnerships. And even beyond that, her own digital marketing agency business was hurt, and resulted in her getting threats to the safety of herself and her family. So in response to all this backlash, she posted a video online to her social media titled Cancel Culture, where she denounced cancel culture and associates it with this woke mob. So I think this really illustrates to us that there's two very different viewpoints for cancel culture. On one hand, we have those that, like Xiaxue, are against it. It says that it infringes on freedom of expression. It doesn't allow sharing of ideas and for new ideas to come about. But on the other hand, we have those that applaud it for demanding accountability and giving people a voice. So moving to our qualitative study where we aim to define cancel culture. So in our literature review, although cancel culture is a new term, and it is an increasingly prominent term, we realize there's a lack of academic literature covering cancel culture. More importantly than that, there is a lack of consensus of what it actually means what cancel culture actually means. So although it is a new concept, it does share some overlaps with some previously established terms. So, for example, online shaming, trolling, and call out culture. So what we found through our literature review was that cancel culture is primarily motivated by the prevention or deterrence of socially unacceptable behavior. So this is similar to that of online shaming and of call out culture. But with cancel culture, we have the added creation of unease and of paranoia. So I think this is one of the main reasons why we sought to try to define cancel culture. We realized that there's so many different consequences associated with cancel culture. So we wanted to narrow down this and actually define cancel culture so that people can really start to understand what it means to cancel, what it means to be cancelled, and why people cancel in the first place. So another thing is that cancel culture is done by a group of people. It is not an individual action. You have to have a group of people behind it in order for it to become a culture. And then lastly, the term that is most interchangeably used in current academic literature of cancel culture is that of call-out culture. But what we found, the main difference between these two terms is that cancel culture not only focuses on present actions of the target, but also focuses on past actions. So like with Xiaxue, they dug up tweets from over 10 years ago. Okay, so to define cancel culture, we conducted 20 in-depth interviews from November to December of last year. So we recruited these people through Instagram, through people who have negatively commented on Xiaxue's post during the time that she was under fire for inciting racism. So we reached out to over 100 people through Instagram, but only 15 people got back to us and qualified for the interview. The remaining 5 interviewees we recruited through snowball sampling. So now I'll pass on the time to Gabrielle, who will go through our research questions and our findings.
So for study 1, we aim to answer 3 RQs, how social media users define cancel culture, how they perceive it, and what factors influence them to engage in it. So in answering RQ1 on how social media users define cancel culture, we identified 4 main dimensions: type of actions, the use of social media, mob mentality, and the presence of a perceived power imbalance. Firstly, type of actions. Actions can be grouped into passive and active actions. Passive actions are those that do not publicly declare one's view, such as unfollowing the person on social media. Active actions publicly declare one's view, such as posting on social media platforms to denounce or withdraw support from the person. Secondly, the use of social media. Almost all our interviewees brought up actions done through social media when asked about what accounts for cancel culture. Many interviewees also mentioned that it was very easy to call someone out online due to the availability of devices and mediated platforms. Thirdly, mob mentality. For cancellation to evolve into a culture, it must reach out to an audience and cause a whole group of people to participate in the cancellation. A couple of interviewees mentioned that while one voice cannot make change on its own, when publicized online, awareness can be spread on the topic at hand and more people can jump on the bandwagon to engage in cancel culture. Lastly, we have a perceived power imbalance. Those getting cancelled often hold power and those who cancel do not. One interviewee mentioned that they believed cancel culture arose to call those in power out for their wrongdoings. It was through this power dynamic that cancel culture started. Moving on to RQ2, which aimed to answer how social media users perceive cancel culture. Our interviewees are quite split on this. So for those with positive perceptions, they mentioned that cancel culture enforces accountability, it calls for reform, educates the general public, presents new perspectives, and gives minorities a chance to voice out. On the other hand, our interviewees also identified numerous negative aspects of cancel culture. They mentioned that it can become toxic and petty, it can lead to insincere reformations, and can be taken too far and turn into a form of doxing. In the case of Xiaxue, actually her home address was leaked, which endangered not only her life, but the lives of her family as well. So most interviewees agreed that while cancel culture arises through positive intentions, more often than not, it results in negative outcomes. Moving on to RQ3, which aimed to find out what factors influence social media users to engage in cancel culture, we identified 3 main points: accountability, justice, and awareness. So for accountability, respondents cancel to get perpetrators to take accountability for their wrongdoings by apologizing and or correcting their behavior. For justice, respondents hope to feel a sense of justice when canceling, as they take it into their own hands to punish the perpetrators. Lastly, we have awareness. So some respondents engage in cancel culture to raise awareness and educate others on social issues. They hope that others will learn that the behavior of perpetrators cannot be tolerated, and they use canceling as a way to spread this message. So for study 1, there are 2 key takeaways: the definition and the motivators. So through our findings, we were able to define cancel culture as the public shaming on social media carried out or supported by a group of people, which aims to hold people accountable for socially incorrect or unacceptable behavior. So the second point on motivators, we found that accountability was the main motivator, and seeking justice was also another important point when it came to cancel culture. Another interesting point to note is that the positive intentions of cancel culture often result in negative outcomes, which may lead to cancel culture being brushed off as an overreaction and not taken seriously. So through these findings, we were able to research deeper into theories related to canceling, as well as formulate our hypotheses and questionnaire for study 2. So now Charlene will be taking over to dive deeper into the second part of our study.
Okay, thanks, Gabrielle. So upon defining the cancel culture in study 1, in study 2, we hope to understand better the motivations behind the cancelling behavior itself. So our entire study 2 is actually based off a questionnaire, and we surveyed 800 participants, and the questionnaire is based on the theory of planned behavior. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the reasons why we actually chose to base off our questionnaire on the TPB. So in study 1, we actually uncovered generally positive attitudes towards cancel culture. However, good intentions may still often lead to negative outcomes. So attitude in the TPB can be defined as a person's positive or negative evaluation of a target behavior. So this actually led to the formulation of our first hypothesis, which is that attitude has a positive influence on the intention to participate in cancel culture. Moving on to the second component of the TPB, subjective norms. It can be broadly defined as an individual's perception of what others think of the behavior. So back in study 1, we also uncovered the presence of a mob mentality in cancel culture. So back in subjective norms, it can be further broken down into 2 different components. The first one being descriptive norms, which can be defined as the extent to which someone's social circle performs the behavior. So this leads us to the formulation of our second hypothesis, which is that descriptive norms have a positive influence on the intention to participate in cancel culture. Moving on to the second component of subjective norms, which is that of the injunctive norms. It can be defined as the expectation of social circle on someone to perform such behavior. So this leads us to our third hypothesis, which is that injunctive norms has a positive influence on one's intention to participate in cancel culture. Moving on to the next component of the TPB model, it is that of the perceived behavioral control. So back in study 1, we uncovered that interviewees actually found it easy to call out socially unacceptable behavior online, largely due to the ease of access on various social media platforms. Similarly, the PBC in the TPB model can be defined as an individual's perceived ability to perform a behavior. So thus, this leads us to our fourth hypothesis, which is that the PBC has a positive influence on their intention to participate in cancel culture. Okay, so moving on, the following variables are actually not included in the original TPB model. However, upon uncovering some results back in study 1, we decided to incorporate these different concepts and come up with a new proposed TPB model for our study. So the first one being outcome expectancy. So in study 1, we discovered the expectation for the perpetrator to take accountability was one of the main reasons why people actually take part in cancel culture. So similarly, outcome expectancy can be defined as the anticipated consequences, positive or negative, as a result of engaging in a behavior. So that leads us to our fifth hypothesis, which is that outcome expectancy has a positive influence on one's intention to participate in cancel culture. So the next one being a belief in a just world. So in study 1, we discovered the perception of power imbalance as well as the moral value of justice. So similarly, the BJW can be broken down into two different components. The first one being the general belief in a just world, and this can be defined as the belief that everyone in the world is treated fairly. And people actually act in ways to maintain this belief when the belief is being threatened. So this leads us to our sixth hypothesis, which is that the general belief in a just world has a negative influence on one's intention to participate in cancel culture. The second component of the BJW would be the personal belief in a just world, which can be defined as the belief that what happens in one's life is just, and this is strongly correlated to many pro-social behaviors. This leads us to our seventh hypothesis, which is that a person's belief in just treatment towards themselves has a positive influence on their intention to participate in cancel culture. Next. Our last and final hypothesis is actually just testing the mediating effect of intention on the various TPB models that I've just gone through earlier. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this then leads us to our new proposed model based on the original TPB model. And this model is used for our study. It now includes outcome expectancy as well as the GBJW and the PBJW. Yeah, so moving on, Beverly will take on from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlene. So an online self-report survey was conducted and respondents were recruited by a third-party research company, which also did the incentive distribution. Out of the 800 respondents, there was a good split of gender, age, education, and ethnicity. Next slide. In terms of the cancelling frequency, we saw some interesting trends. More than half of our respondents have actually never engaged in cancelling behaviours specified in our questionnaire, and about a third said that they engaged in these behaviours frequently in the last 6 months. We found the younger people as a whole cancelled more frequently, and those who engaged in cancelling were usually male, minority race, or had at least a degree. Next. So these were the specific behaviours that we measured based on the results from our study 1. We found that there were more passive actions such as unfollowing perpetrators or actions that were easier to carry out. They were reported more frequently, such as leaving comments on the perpetrator's post, where the actions were taken more frequently when cancelling. And the more effortful behaviours or those with heavier consequences, such as signing petitions calling for brands to withdraw their support from influencers and reporting to the perpetrator's employers, were least frequently reported. Next. We measured the various TPB and BJW components and related them to cancelling intention and behaviour. The items measuring TPB and cancel culture related intentions and behaviours were constructed using responses and actions mentioned by participants in study 1. And for all of the measures in our questionnaire, we used a 7-point Likert scale for all of the items, with 1 being strongly disagree and 7 being strongly agree. We used case process macro on SPSS to conduct mediation analysis. Next. And we found that demographic factors did not significantly affect intention, but only behavior, and also found that education and age were significant predictors of behavior, while race surprisingly was not. Next. To test our hypothesis in predicting intention, the regression model found hypothesis 1 to 6 to be supported, which is that attitude, descriptive norms, injunctive norms, PDC, and outcome expectancy are positively related to intention to cancel, and GBJW is negatively related to intention to cancel. Hypothesis 7 was not supported as there was no significant relationship between PBJW and intention to cancel. Next. To test hypothesis A through G, we've conducted mediation analysis and we found that the only attitude, injunctive norms, and PDC have an indirect effect on behavior through intention. Descriptive norms and the additional variables did not have any indirect effects on behavior through intention. Next. So the main takeaways from our study 2 are that TPB proves itself to be a robust theory and is indeed useful in predicting online behavior and intention, even when it comes to novel phenomena like cancel culture. We also found that PDC was the variable which accounts for the most variance and significantly affects behavior through intention. It's interesting that outcome expectancy did not have an effect on behavior through intention, which means that the ease of performing a cancelling behavior is more of a motivator than the expected outcome of one's actions. And perhaps people tend to participate in cancelling simply to feel like they have done something instead of actually wanting to enact change. While we added the BJW to study the effect of morals on behavior on top of the TPB, we found that people who think the world is generally unfair tend to act in ways which attempt to correct the injustice as well. And just to wrap up our presentation, next slide. Yep. Our study contributes to the scan literature on the growing phenomenon of cancel culture and offers some insight on what motivates such behavior. We were also able to define what cancel culture means in the local Singaporean context. And with this kind of knowledge, we're able to help marketers, influencers, and lay people better navigate through the vast digital landscape and understand the phenomenon known as cancel culture better. Next. We suggest that future studies also study past behavior, so if people engage in it are doing it out of habit or not, as well as additional TPB predictors which have not been studied in this context, such as personality or self-efficacy. Also, investigating the level of personal relevance of the issue compared to a more general issue could provide more insight on how much each condition motivates one to cancel. And lastly, because the idea of power and privilege is repeatedly brought up, we think it will be worthwhile to further study the relationship between perceived power and privilege on behavior. And with that, we've come to the end of our presentation. Thank you, and we'll be answering a few questions now if there are any.
Thanks, Beverly and the whole team. So yeah, we have some time to take in initial questions. If you have any at this point, of course, we will have a longer Q&A later after the second presentation is done. But if you have any questions, you can let us know via chat, or you can raise your hand and I can call on you if you have anything to share or any comment for the group, or you have any experiences or research related to cancel culture. Yep. All right, I think everyone's still warming up, trying to really absorb what the group has shared so far. And so again, if you have any questions at any point during the next several minutes, please type them in the chat or raise your hand. And so after the second presentation, I really hope we can have a good discussion. Definitely, we're happy to share with you the results of the studies we've been doing, but I know you have either personal experiences or any related research that you're doing. We'd also love to hear about that. So thank you so much, Charlene, Gabriel, Beverly, and Rachel. And now we will switch to the next presentation, which is within the specific context of COVID-19. And this one will be about online vigilantes during the outbreak. I'll turn it over to my Eureka student and our student also at WKWSCI, Guanpeng.
Hello everyone, my name is Guanpeng. If at any point in time the slides is not very visible, please do feel free to let me know. Thanks Prof Edson. So my name is Guanpeng and I will be sharing on some of the research findings that we did on online vigilantism during the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, we are looking for some of the motivations behind the acts of online vigilantism. So perhaps one first questions that you might have on this is, what exactly does online vigilantism look like in Singapore? And as Prof Edson mentioned just now, online vigilantism is something that within Singapore that happens not exclusively to the COVID-19 pandemic setting, and it happens all the time. But specifically when it comes to the COVID-19 period, some of the interesting things that we saw or we came across during this period includes incidents where people were doxing people that were not wearing masks or were not adhering to safety distancing measures. So there was one of the instances in which the netizens actually identified an individual who proclaimed to be a sovereign woman and was someone that was unwilling to put on a mask when she was outdoors. The problem of which was that the online netizens wrongly identified the individual. They identified a person by the name of Ms. Tuhina Singh, who was a CEO at a tech firm. And when the court eventually released the details of the person that they charged, it was someone that was completely different by the name of Ms. Paramjit Kaur. And so we do see some kind of a lack of accuracy at times when the doxers are trying to identify the person that they have. But for the most part, online vigilantism in Singapore looks predominantly like the kind of call-outs that they might see in Instagram accounts such as SG Covidiots or SG Dirty Fellas, where what they mostly do is post photos that the community might have sent in, or photos that they have taken themselves as administrators, where people do not wear masks and people break all the COVID rules. And that's predominantly what it looks like in Singapore, where most of the kind of activity usually happens on the public and the social media sphere, such as Instagram. Right. So just an overview and of the research, and the most important thing at the start was that we needed to define vigilantism and needed to define online vigilantism. Just as much as cancel culture. There wasn't really a lot of existing literature on this matter, but based on the findings that we have, right, based on the literature review, we could define vigilantism as a series of collective action taken online with the intention of righting social norms against a person or an entity that had caused moral outreach. And specifically the difference between online vigilantism and vigilantism, right, obviously is that it has to happen on the online sphere. But another important factor to consider in this situation is that it does not have to cause any kind of physical bodily harm. We can see a lot of different types of harm that happens to people, particularly when it comes to their reputation and some kind of psychological well-being as well, are potential areas in which people might be hurt from or might be impacted because of the acts of online vigilantism. Some of the supporting theories that we use to surround our research with and to back our research up includes the theory of planned behavior, just world theory, and the theory of self-efficacy, similar to the theories that you saw just now in the previous presentation as well. So the aims of this research is to understand the motivations behind the acts of online vigilantism, and specifically we want to know why do people act out in this specific way. So for the methodology, in terms of the demographic data that we collected, right, based on the demographic data that we collected, and the people that we surveyed, we basically conducted a survey of 1,000 Singapore residents, and the age range for the respondents ranged between individuals that were aged 21 all the way until the age of 99. And data collection period was actually during July 2020, where they were surveyed for their behaviors a couple of weeks ago in June 2020. The important thing to consider in this situation is the time context. In June 2020 in Singapore, we were going through our circuit breaker period, right? And it was a period where issues on mask wearing and safety distancing are all very salient within the society. These were the topics of conversation that was happening in the comforts of everyone's home, right? On these matters. So these are things that was very close to everyone's heart at that period in time. Some of the other demographic data that I'm presenting also includes the individual's income levels and their level of education, which vary widely. Right. In terms of what we were trying to look for, there were two general categories of the two general aspects of things that we were looking at. First, on the attitudes towards social distancing, where some of the questions that we were asking surrounded how often people reported others that were violating safety distancing measures to authorities, or also as well, how often do people share other people's posts about others violating safety distancing. So an example of which could be when we ask our respondents, were they likely to share certain Instagram posts such as those that we see on SG Covidiot on their social media account as well. On the other hand, another aspect of things that we were looking at also included the attitudes towards mask wearing. So we were looking for how perhaps often people were posting posts on social media for their own social media on others that's not wearing a mask, and even like how often do they tell someone outside who's not currently wearing a mask to put on one. And these were some of the notable results that we found. When it came to attitudes towards social distancing, we realized that close to 2/3 of all our respondents remind others outside to maintain safety distancing, and and a rather significant amount of them, about a fifth and a quarter of them, do it once or twice. And if we take into context the time period that was involved in this, we do realize that within the first 1 or 2 months or so during circuit breaker, and perhaps that's also during the period where people were slowly coming out, right? So within about that 4 to 6 week time period or so, a good chunk of people has already reminded others to maintain this kind of safety distancing action at least once or twice, and sometimes even more. A significant number of people have also posted a photo or video on social media that depicts others violating safety distancing measures as well. And in the same realms of the number of people that reacted that way, over a third of the respondents actually reported others who violated these kind of measures to government authorities. And this is where perhaps it also differs slightly from online vigilantism, in that perhaps the people that were more likely to report these incidents to government authorities seem to be the people that were suggesting some kind of action to be taken by the government, right, rather than taking these actions into their own hands. So this is perhaps people that were not acting out individually, right? On the other hand, when it comes to the attitudes towards mask wearing, right, we realized that over half of the respondents have ever reminded others outside to put on a mask. This was, like I said, this was an issue that was rather salient during the period in time, and if anyone at any point in time didn't put on a mask, it seemed to show that over half of the respondents would actually do something like that to remind someone to put on the mask. Almost a third of all respondents reported to have posted some kind of a photo or video on their social media accounts as well, depicting others that would have violated these safety distancing measures. And just as much in the same realms, right? Almost a third of the respondents actually reported someone who was not wearing a mask to government authorities. And based on that, right, we basically conducted a regression analysis to try and identify some of the significant predictors to online vigilantism. And these were the four main predictors that really played a rather significant role in predicting some of the online vigilantism behaviors that were out there. And we found that the TPB model was a model that significantly predicted quite a portion of the motivators behind online vigilantism, with factors such as the injunctive norms, descriptive norms, and PBC, which refers to perceived behavioral control, all being factors that play a part in predicting online vigilantism. Just as much so, we realized that GBJW, or the general belief in just war, was also one of the factors that really did play a part in affecting or motivating factors behind the acts of online vigilantism. One of the interesting things to note, however, was that PBJW wasn't the personal belief in just war, or the belief that the incidents and the happenings around your immediate social circle and your immediate social life, it wasn't one of the factors that actually played a role in that, which was rather interesting. But yeah, with that, I've come to the end of my sharing. So I think it's the Q&A session now. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks, Guanpeng, and thanks to all of our students for presenting their projects today. Now I will ask questions or inputs or suggestions from everyone. This is now a time for us to discuss. Let if you can just let us know your thoughts or even your personal experience about this. I remember just last night I actually asked 2 people I came across while walking from office to home to put their masks on. But I mean, was that me being an online vigilante, right? But I thought it's quite interesting, and also I think something that Guanpeng already touched on briefly is, this study was done in July, where you can arguably we were at the peak of the pandemic here in Singapore. Maybe the interesting question is whether such online vigilante behaviors are persisting until now, or with COVID fatigue, people have also let their guards down and have become more tolerant of those not following regulations. Any questions or comments from anyone in the room? All right. I know we have questions from Professor Dedenber. Variants. Let me go first to Beverly. Beverly, maybe you can share with us in terms of the variants explained of the TPB model that you tested within the cancel culture context.
Yeah, so actually our model for intention came back with a 77% variance, and then our behavior model came back with 22%. So I guess what we could kind of gather from this is that even though intention predicted behavior to some extent, it doesn't predict it fully. So there might be like other predictors of cancelling behavior which weren't studied in our study, and like future studies might want to account for.
Okay, thanks, Beverly, and I think similar question for Guanpeng on online vigilantism. The variance explained there is 55%, but the difference is in the online vigilante study, we use TPB to directly predict behavior, just because there are measurable items on online vigilante behavior. So that accounted for 55%, which is, I think, is quite typical of a theory of planned behavior. It has high predictive value, and yes, TPB is usually good at prediction. And for me, what was very interesting though is how in cancel culture, and Guanpeng, if you can remind me if it's also true with online vigilantism, how attitude is not a significant predictor. Guanpeng, right? It's not a significant predictor, right? Which I thought was quite interesting, right? Because it's intuitive and also validated by many studies that use TPB, right? That a positive attitude toward a behavior makes people more likely to engage in that behavior. But in both cancel culture and in both cancel culture and online vigilantism, attitude toward the behavior was not a significant predictor, which I thought was quite interesting. So in a way, I think this captures the ambivalence that people have about the nature of canceling someone or shaming someone for not doing quote unquote the right thing. I think people perceive that to be something good that they ought to do, but they also, I think, have some ambivalence on whether that is an entirely positive behavior. And I think that is captured by this finding that a positive attitude toward that behavior does not automatically translate into intending to engage in that behavior. I think we have a question or a comment from TJ.
Yeah, hi. Mine is a very short question. Since we are on the variable of attitude, I see that it was operationalized in terms of frequency, like how often do you report? So just wondering whether is there a reason behind operationalizing it in terms of frequency?
Good question. A very sharp, TJ. That's an issue in the slides, not in the study. So So basically, what I think you're referring to the online vigilante study, right? What Guanpeng was showing was that slide should have said the behavior of engaging in online vigilantism. Yeah, but attitude was one of the predictors that we examined.
Okay.
Yeah, but very sharp. Yeah, good catch. Thanks, TJ.
Welcome.
Yep. Other questions or comments or anything you want to share about cancel culture, online vigilantism? We have a comment from Simon. Welcome. Simon is coming to us from. Are you in Taipei now?
Yeah, I'm in Taipei right now.
Yeah.
And
Hi, Simon.
hi, I just want to know, is it any possible that I can use the concept of online bullying to replace the concept of online vigilantism? Is that possible?
Yeah, very good question. And I think that can be addressed by our FYP cancel culture group. They actually tried to tease out the differences between some of these related terms. And on online bullying or cyber bullying is one of the concepts that they looked at. Anyone from, I think Rachel is sharing her screen again. Anyone from our cancel culture group who wants to take on this question? I think you need to unmute. Rachel.
Okay, so yeah, okay. So I think when it comes to I think you specifically asked for online bullying and online vigilantism. So for that one, I'm not super sure because I compared for our literature, we compare everything to cancel culture. But when it comes to like online bullying versus cancel culture, I think what the difference that we have found is like, for example, with online bullying, it can be for anything, but then with online shaming or cancel culture, there's the added element of socially unacceptable behavior as well with that. So it has to be a behavior that is wrong, whereas bullying could be about anything. It could be, I would think it can be quite similar to trolling. It could just be for someone's own amusement, but this is specifically for socially unacceptable behavior. And then also when we compare on online bullying to when we talk about cancel culture has to be done by multiple people, whereas like online bullying and I think even online vigilantism, those can be done by an individual person. That I think but then when we compare to cancel culture, it has to be done by multiple.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I would agree based on what I've read from these two presentations that we have. I think that what distinguishes cancel culture and online vigilantism from, say, trolling and cyberbullying is first the motivation of there's some altruism, socially pro-social element involved where the one of the motivations is to correct that something that the doer perceives to be wrong or a transgression of a social norm. In cancel culture, what I thought was fascinating is also the element of a power imbalance, where those who engage in canceling tend to perceive themselves as of a lower position in terms of power dynamics, and so you see those who are getting canceled are influencers or maybe some politicians or celebrities. So I think there is some element of people thinking that there is no other way because they are on a lower, in the terms of the power dynamics, they are in a lower position. They are taking advantage of these available online platforms to, in a way, tip or balance the power imbalance that they perceive. Which I thought is, a cancel culture has been called out, right? I think rightfully so, for overdoing things, but I think it's important to understand the motivations behind it, and I think one important motivation is this idea of power imbalance and hoping to equalize such imbalance, which I think is not present or not very much salient in the context of cyberbullying. Yeah, I hope that helps, Simon, and hello. Yeah, I'm glad that you can join us. Okay, let me just check the chat or anyone else who wants to share their experience with or research on cancel culture or online vigilantes? Okay, we have a question from Madhu. Let me read this up, and I think this is okay. This addressed to the cancel culture group. How long does the canceling last? In a mob mentality, people may cancel or stop following, but after some time, they may forget and start following again. I think that is quite interesting. In the cancel culture group, I think this is partly addressed in some of the interviews that you've done, right? Anyone from our cancel culture group?
Yes. So
Rachel? Yeah.
for this, right, I think it was very interesting because like when we were doing our interviews, we actually asked like, so do you think that what you have done has actually effectively cancelled Xiaxue? Or, you know, do you think that Xiaxue is cancelled in the first place? And a lot of them said that actually she still has like over 100K followers. She still has, you know, even though she was getting a lot of negative attention, a lot of people still followed her. And even though she still got, you know, she did get brand partnerships actually pulled out from their sponsorships with her, she was still doing fine. She was still earning money. She could still support her family. So I think this was something that this was one of the reasons why we decided to include the outcome expectancy into our study tool. It was very interesting to see that element of it, because nowadays, especially on social media, people just cancel and then they move on to the next person. Like it's
I think that's a very interesting point, Madhu, and I'm glad that you're joining us. I'm also thinking about. I think what's interesting with cancel culture is you can get canceled for things you've done like 15, 10, 5 years ago, right? So in a way, but also at the same time, on the other hand, right? Online, the people online have a very short attention span. Probably also, I would say. So again, this is open to discussion, but in a way, you can say people on social media online have a short attention span, perhaps also a short-term memory in that they move on to the next one. But the thing is, another affordance of the online system is permanence, right? Where something that you do will be there. You will have a record of your tweets from several years ago. So I'm thinking that people might forget in the short term, but all it takes is just for someone to bring something up again, and I think it would flare up again. So I think it's an interesting question, and I think something that researchers should continue to keep track of, really understanding this kind of behavior online. Because we can see from Xiaoshui, after a point of time, it seems like people have forgotten, they're not talking about it. But I also feel like all it takes is just for someone to dig up, and share something again from what she's posted before. So really interesting question, Madhu.
Actually, so adding on to what Prof Edson said, so actually Xiaxue, right, with her tweets being dug up last year, it was actually the reason why her tweets were dug up was actually partly in response to her participation in the general election, and she was getting quite a lot of negative feedback from that, and also because it kind of surfaced that she supported Donald Trump, for example, and then it was because of all this that people got kind of angry at her, and I think that is why they started digging into her past. So yeah, that's just an example. Yeah.
Thanks. Yep. So we have another question from Professor Andrew Paul. Did some of the measures differentiate cancel culture for individuals, i.e., Karen? But we have Karen here. Karen from InQ. So if for individuals versus organizations, i.e., let's cancel Dolce & Gabbana or cancel a brand. The question is, are we confident that participants were thinking of this only on the interpersonal level? So I think this is a question for the cancel culture group. Anyone wants to answer? Gabrielle?
Yeah, I think for Singapore in general, because cancel culture only sort of arose here after Xiaxue's whole saga. And after that, we followed up with Joanna Ting and Dikosh. And then after that, it sort of died down again. And now it's back up with Hua Chong, the old lady on the train. Versus like organizations like Dolce & Gabbana. I actually did a study on Dolce & Gabbana. Basically, they pushed out a bunch of racist ads. Like they I think they sexualized Chinese model and sort of like made fun of Chinese culture, if I'm not wrong. And I think that's more prevalent in countries such as the USA, whereas in Singapore, I think it's more on the individual level rather than the organizational level. Like as of now, I don't think any company has actually done anything that has made anyone very angry or anything. I think in Singapore it's quite PC, whereas in America, I think racism is a lot more prevalent there, which is why companies such as Dolce and Gabbana, they get cancelled for doing this sort of thing. But as in even like Rachel mentioned previously, Xiaxue is still alive now, Dolce and Gabbana is still alive now. So I'm not very sure whether cancel culture is very effective anyway. Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Prof. Andy.
Sorry, just to add on to Gabrielle, for our questionnaire, we actually specified the definition of cancel culture. So all of our questionnaire, our online questionnaire respondents knew that we were talking about it on an interpersonal level as well.
Yeah. So I was good. Thanks, Gabriel and Beverly. So yeah, in the questionnaire itself, the survey questionnaire, I think the group specified, right, that the intention and behavior refers to someone who has done something. Yeah. So I think that based on that, I think we have confidence that we're only focusing on an individual as the target of canceling. But I think what Prof. Andy shared is also very important, right? Maybe to examine whether the mechanisms that we found in this study is also true when it comes to canceling brands or companies. Because if you think about it, the power imbalance there is stronger in terms of an individual or even a collective, but a collective of consumers then engaging in canceling a big company or a brand. So I think that would be quite fascinating. I think TJ typed something on the chat as well. It would be interesting to do a comparison on the cancel culture involving influencers who have been around for a long time and newer ones. Yeah, I think so. If we think of the idea of power imbalance, right? Definitely someone who's more established, right? Is on a stronger or higher level when it comes to the power dynamics than something more recent. Although if you think about it, there are also like new influencers who would just shoot to fame very quickly. So in the short term, even if they're new, they might be a stronger influencer than one who's been around but whose popularity is waning. So yeah, but yeah, that good idea. I was also thinking, TJ, right, that it could be good to see whether someone who's been canceled before and was able to come back, so to speak, if that person gets canceled again, is that person, now that we talk about COVID, right, and vaccination, is that influencer somehow immune to being canceled, or does that strengthen one's immunity from canceling? All right, we have a question from Ting Ting. How do we understand the possible consequences of online vigilantism, such as public pressure on legal trial, privacy issues, etc.? Guan Peng, do you want to take on this?
Yes. Right. Thank you for the question. It was very interesting thought as well, particularly from the legal aspect of things. Yeah, we realized that some of the implications, especially on the legal aspect that comes in, right, is that in the existing or in the literature review that we did or that we were looking at subsequently as well, we found out that like most of these kind of punishments often resulted in like some form of civil liability rather than criminal in nature, despite the fact that the kind of harm and the kind of damages that could be done and inflicted upon an individual from the acts of online vigilantism sometimes might not proportionally weigh to it. So in our understanding of, or from the understanding of what we have in our research, right, I think like one of the important things that perhaps it could add some weight to in terms of its discussion could come more in the form of its capability of classifying these behaviors, of what are some of the things that we should look out for when it comes to the acts of online vigilantism to better understand if those were the intentions. In Singapore, for example, we know there's POFMA and POHA, right? And these would perhaps be incidents that would relate more so to POHA, or the Protection of Online Harassment Act, right? Where we see individuals being able to reach out to channels. But these aren't legislation that exists in a lot of the countries. And we do see that these are perhaps some of the kind of legislation that perhaps would not be able to stand in countries like the States, for example, or UK and most of the European countries, right, where the freedom of speech is something that is perhaps prioritized over a lot of other things, including in this situation, for example, like hate speech. Even hate speech in the US is hard to stand and hard to form a case around. So what this perhaps definitely would do is to come up with some kind of a parameter for us to understand whether or not someone is acting out of the intention of being an online vigilante. And yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Thanks, Guan Peng. And also, thinking, I think it's important to distinguish between consequences to the target of online vigilantism, but also consequences of the one perpetrating it. I think in the some of the cases that Guan Peng showed, we see how some of I guess response from the police, for example, were triggered by acts of online vigilantism. You know, so I think authorities acted on some of these pieces going viral of people not following rules. I think we've also seen examples of people posting photos of their parties, and you know, online viewers noted that they were actually violated the maximum number of people in a gathering, and that led to actual consequences for this group. So I think it would be interesting to important to see the distinction, also the consequences to the one perpetrating the vigilante act, and also the consequences to the target of that behavior.
Right. Maybe I could add on a little
Yeah.
bit. Right.
Sure.
Yeah. So in this conversation of the kind of role that individuals on social media play, right? It's rather interesting because we in our research we also realize, or in our literature review, we also learned that the first inklings of like the acts of online vigilantism really happened only less than 2 decades ago. It happened way beyond into the 2000s era. So with the way and the trend in which social media is going and how it really influences everyone's lives, right? It really does increasingly beg the question of what kind of a role would individuals on social media play in collaboration with the police as well. I think like because of how it's so easy to share this kind of information and so easy to repost information, and we see instances like Prof Edson said, where police take action after these posts on social media were made. A very important, a very interesting question in the future is the kind of is on how you can collaborate, the kind of collaborative nature that likely exists between individuals on social media and government authorities, right? And whether or not it's something that is worth operationalizing into a formal structure for governments to adopt.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So I think for me, again, just to close this, I think for me, what's striking is although there are excesses of cancel culture and online vigilantism, right, and there are potentially harmful consequences to the targets, such as doxing or privacy being compromised. I think what is enlightening for me based on these two presentations is that some people who engage in these behaviors actually have positive motivations in doing so. They clearly see a transgression that needs to be corrected. There's some component of, at least in the cancel culture presentation, some component of wanting to educate others about what you shouldn't do, what should not be acceptable. Of course, that can be taken to the extreme, but I think in both presentations, what we're seeing is people who engage in these behaviors use online platforms as a channel to do something that they think couldn't do normally. I think they're using online channels as a way to voice out what they think. So, and I think that the Singapore government, for example, tried to address that fact by, I think during COVID, providing a platform for people to report violations of safe distancing, of mask wearing. So I think they recognize that in the beginning, the lack of such platform might be motivating people to engage in online shaming as a way to correct what they think was a form of a transgression. But I think even with that, when we did the study, that platform is already available, and we actually asked a specific question on that: how often people have used that platform, government platform, to report transgressions that they perceive or witness. And I think one thing why we only saw like 1/3 of the participants use that. Others still continue engaging in online vigilantism. So I think something that for us to continue thinking about, knowing what factors motivate people to engage in canceling and online vigilantism, I think should help us reflect on what are the available mechanisms that maybe for the lay people, available to the lay people when it comes to taking part in ensuring that things are going as how they should be in terms of, people following rules and whatnot. But thank you so much for everyone for attending, and thank you to our students for sharing their research. We hope to see everyone again in our next webinar. We try to do monthly webinars at InCube. And if you have suggestions, or if you want to share your research in our webinar, please let me know, and we can invite you in our next online presentation. Thank you.